quality, inclusive democracy. The three main groups of people who were going to be affected by whatever the decision was were actually shut out of the process. So that was EU 27 citizens who live and work in this country and pay into the tax economy. It also was British citizens living in the EU. If they'd been abroad for more than 15 years, they lost the right to vote, but yet they still have ties with the UK. Many of them have homes here, many of them have businesses here still. And of course, young people under the age of 18 were also not allowed to vote, and they are going to inherit whatever happens as a result of Brexit. So for me, it was the minute the bill was going through the Parliament, it was beginning to limit the people who could participate in the process. And so I'm very concerned about inclusive democracy, and I don't believe that the Brexit referendum process was inclusive. It also was subject to a lot of digital media interference. We do know already about the data theft that Facebook facilitated. So Facebook allowed AIG and Cambridge Analytica, the two companies that were kind of behind the digital manipulation, the psychosocial profiling that went on. Facebook actually allowed data theft. They gave loads and loads of details of people's Facebook profiles to those companies. And the people who that happened to didn't know. They didn't give their permission. So we have some massive issues here about data, about people's personal data. We've also got issues about the media. So whenever there's a democratic process, the media are reporting on it. But you have to look at who owns the media, and are the media really doing in-depth stories? Are they reporting fairly? Are they giving the widest range of people a platform to comment on what is happening? And I believe that we don't have a fair and pluralistic media in this country, and the media are very much linked to different political parties. They're funding them. That lots of people are going to fancy dinners where they're exchanging grace and favors. So I have massive problems with the process that we unleashed on our country. Also, for decades, we had failed to do any citizenship education. Maybe kids in schools had like half an hour a week or something, but I wouldn't say that is quality citizenship education. And teachers were not really given the tools to engage kids in getting them excited about citizenship. So if you don't know what your rights and responsibilities are, then it's very difficult to feel confident about exercising those rights. And I believe that we failed a whole generation of people by not really engaging them in citizenship education. And
that's actually quite powerful, and I think it really ties in to the question that I would like to discuss with and ask to Ms. Xu, because she's an inspiring activist working and for pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong, and there the situation is completely the opposite, right? So you have people that have great awareness, and there are more and more awareness, but they are cracking down by an oppressive government. And so the challenge is completely the opposite. And so I wanted to ask you to Ms. Xu, so what was the tipping point for her? The moment when she realized that the only available opportunity, the only option available was taking the streets.
Yes, hi. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, very well.
Yes, hi, this is Joey from Hong Kong. So I had been acting as a student activist and the vice president of my student union of my university since last year. And because of the extradition bill movement in Hong Kong, we had been participating in student movements. We had been organizing different kinds of class boycott campaigns and different kinds of forums and talks to promote the idea of democracy and to educate our students and also the general public about our some very basic legal knowledge. And I think, and I had also been lobbying and talking to the other parliamentary members of different countries to lobby for different kinds of policies that are defending Hong Kong's interests and defending our universal values. But then after the introduction of the national security law in Hong Kong, I am no longer able to talk to the foreign politicians. I can no longer lobby for the interests of Hong Kong, and we Hong Kong people cannot even take onto the streets anymore. And that is also that is also the moment when we realize that we have to explore the other possibilities of sustaining our movement and to continue to defend the interests of Hong Kong, to defend our universal values in other ways. And we also come to realize that the thing we are doing right now is not only about Hong Kong. We are not simply trying to protect Hong Kong from China's very aggressive invasion. We are also trying to alert the world with Hong Kong's experiences that the rise of China is dangerous, and that we have to protect our universal values. We have to protect our democracy and freedom, and we should never give up these values in exchange of the very, very potential and huge economic market in China. And so that is also why it is very important, and we are very grateful that we have organizations like NOW and the other organizations overseas to help to continue to promote the ideas and to continue to spread the information from Hong Kong. Yes.
Thank you for your intervention, Ms. Xu, because actually it really kind of deepens the picture of increasing exclusion towards particular minority or minoritized groups that we see across the globe, and this is actually a threat to democracy. And on this line, I want to ask you to the next speaker, and I'm not gonna pronounce the surname because I want to know that pronunciation, but Miss Yasmine Ouirhrane, sorry, you became the Young European of the year 2019, and after that you started a very inspiring podcast aiming at giving a voice to all those women who often are disregarded. And so again, we're talking about a minoritized group in a supposedly democratic country like the European Union. So how do you think that this plays into democratic trends in the EU?
Thank you so much. I hope that you hear me well.
Very well.
Great. So it's Yasmine Ouirhrane. I'm happy to join this conversation, and I want to start by sending all my support to Joyce Yu and to all the people in Hong Kong. And when we hear what is happening around the world, not only in Hong Kong, but also in Lebanon, also in Ethiopia, also in Sudan, all the revolutions and democratic processes happening across the world, we should remind ourselves of, first of all, how lucky we are to live in Europe. And secondly, our responsibility to promote those values and not hypocritically performing democracy, but also guaranteeing the democracy stays as a right for all citizens. So when it comes to democracy, as I understand it, I see democracy as an opportunity for young and older and all citizens actually to come into politics and bring their part and have a power in voting and shaping society. But when it comes to minorities, and not only minorities, I also want to talk about youth women, and minorities. So these three categories are often underrepresented on politics. And so the core of my goal is guaranteeing that these people have a voice. You know, when it comes to Europe, we are, you know, seeing the rise of extremism, both far-right extremism, religious motivated extremism, and the process of, you know, becoming, you know, authoritarian or radicalized or extremist is by ordering people. So the process is, I am different and you don't belong here. And so in order to counter those narratives that are alienating citizens in our European democratic countries, my goal is to spread democracy and spread human rights and peace by saying we all belong. So when I give a voice to the young immigrant daughters across Europe, I also want this voice to be listened and acknowledged and recognized by all citizens in Europe. So this is my focus.
Thank you for your words, because actually, if we move back to the post-Brexit UK and trying to link it to Hong Kong and then the EU, but also going beyond that, we see that a UK government now ready to breach international law, to breach treaties of human rights, ready to be even more right-wing than we ever thought it could have been, and so we fought against Brexit, and then on the other side of the channel there are also issues with the European Union democracy, with Hungary and Poland. These countries are more and more cracking on democratic values, and of course the situation, the dire situation in Hong Kong. So my question is there anything that we should have done differently, not just with Brexit, but also in the case of Hong Kong, but also in the case of Hungary and Poland? So what choices remain now, Mrs. Ward?
What should we have done differently? I think that we need always to see the most diverse representation of people in any assembly, in any elected assembly. And so one of the things that I always say is, if you don't see yourself represented in the parliament or the local council or the school governing body, then you might need to be the person who puts your hand up and steps into that space. My colleague here made a very important point about women and youth. You know, women make up, I think, more than 50% of the world's population, and yet only make up a minority in any elected bodies, particularly at parliament level. That's not the case in Rwanda, which has a majority of huge number of women MPs. But often the situation prevails because men like to have power. They like to have power. They like to have position. They're not willing to move over. They're not willing to share the space. And there are some fantastic examples which I'm going to use, and I know that my friend Margaret Owen is listening and on the call. So there, the HDP opposition party, Kurdish opposition party in Turkey, has a wonderful system of co-chairing and co-mayors. So when a mayor is elected, for example, in the Kurdish city Ahmed Diyarbakir, they had both a man and a woman occupying that position, and that seems to be a very good way, an inclusive way of making sure that the issues that affect both men and both women are being dealt with properly at that municipal level. Now, if we could just get our different organizations, our different levels of authority to look at those models and to see how how they operate, and not to be frightened by them, but to see them as a way to be more inclusive, I think would be very, very good. In northern Syria, in Rojava, it's women who are rebuilding democratic society there. At all levels, and a lot of that is about education. So I would constantly return to the issue of education, and education isn't just something that happens in schools that stops at 16 when you leave. It is a lifelong process, and we really need to we really need to be empowering people to believe that politics is for everybody. It's not for other people. You have to claim it. You have to take the space. You have to make your voice heard. At some point, you might need to be the person who says, I will stand. And I would just love, I'm a poet. I'm a poet and a theatre maker, really. I felt I was an accidental politician. And I look at the community of artists around me and I'm going, where are they? Why didn't they step into the political space with me? So, we don't want just to have a parliament of people who studied politics at university. We want to have that parliament, with housewives in there. We want to have bricklayers. We want to have investigative journalists. We need to see this diet. We want to have LGBT people, trans people. What we need is to see all our representative bodies reflecting the modern society which we are. And so it's great. It was great to watch some incredible new young women become elected in the US, like AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, for example. But she's not the only one. And whenever we see those people, that is inspiring, and we should be holding up those examples more and more.
I cannot agree with you more. And today we had with us in our conference artists, filmmakers, so singers. They really showed how powerful culture can be in bringing awareness and also to mobilize people. And so how about Hong Kong? So what choices remain now that the government is brutally cracking down on any form of dissension?
Well, yes. So before the implementation of the national security law, we could still take on to the streets. We could still protest and participate in assemblies. But then after the introduction of the national security law, we could no longer protest, because simply by joining an assembly or organizing a forum, that could cause you a very, very serious offense under the national security law. So we Hong Kongers are left with very, very few choices after the introduction of the law. But then we're still trying to explore every possibility to sustain our movement and to bring out the idea of protecting and defending democracy and freedom in Hong Kong, because we feel like we cannot surrender to the Chinese government or to any tyrannies in the world simply when they're trying to implement laws or implement regulations that restricts us from protesting, from participating in assemblies. We can still do, for example, we can still do protests overseas. We can still try to integrate our ideas into artwork, to integrate our ideas in poems. We can still try to explore the other possibilities. For example, the government had banned us from making the Lennon walls in Hong Kong. So instead, we're taking some blank papers to protest with no words on it, so the government cannot arrest us. I mean, there are so many ways that we can sustain our movement if we are brave enough to try, if we are determined enough to try. And I think it is very important for us to never give up and never let go any chances to rebel, because I think it is very important for us to rebel to tyrannies, to anything that you think that is not right and that is not just. Because, for example, in Hong Kong is a very, you can say it is a very traditional society, because like ever since we are growing up, we are always cultivated by very traditional Chinese values, that saying that we should never rebel, we should always listen to our parents, we should always listen to the government, we should always listen to those who are in power. But then when we come to realize that our parents are not always right, our government is not always right. So I think it is very important for us, the people in Hong Kong, and also to all the people around the world, to have the courage and to be brave enough to rebel, because we are the only ones who are able to speak for ourselves. And I think the idea, and I also think the idea of Julie is very, very important and inspiring to us all, that we have to stand up for ourselves. If you see that there is no one standing up for you, I think no matter you are a female, no matter you are youth, no matter where you are from, you can always grab the chance and then stand up for ourselves. And I think another very important thing that we have learned from our protests this year and from the other movements around the world is that we have to stand up for ourselves and at the same time stand with each other, because the core values of our movements and our protests are the same, that we are defending freedom and democracy, which are our universal values. So I think it is very, very important for us to stand up for ourselves and to stand with each other.
Thank you for your words. That is actually so powerful. You said when the government is so oppressive that every word you utter, you can be in danger, then you can still make a difference by saying nothing, but standing and, you know, with empty, with your hands empty but still standing. But it's then that you need solidarity, and so which is very important, and a constant attention to these issues. What about the situation in the European Union? And so we see after and during this global pandemic then that in many countries young people are the most who are suffering, and among them, and in general, women. So in this deteriorating situation, what choices remain?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, I totally agree with the points raised by Julie and Joy, because when we talk about democracy, first of all, we need to know our rights, right? We need to know and to learn about how we can and what we can do and what we cannot do, but then challenging also what we cannot do. For example, I know that in Hong Kong, it's very difficult to speak up without facing you know, the power structures, but then you need to, because as activists we have a responsibility, and also we are protecting some values that for us are super important. For me, when I advocate out there about minorities' rights or youth rights, or just when I win a prize, I face discrimination, I face threats. It's not a threat physical as much as it would be maybe from authorities. So I really want to differentiate these. And there is a higher scale that you know, other activists face in other contexts. But in Europe, we are still very exposed to violence and hate. And so how can I continue to do what I do safely without, you know, fear? When people reach out to me to ask me this question, what I tell them is, if I don't speak, who will? So we are facing something that for me is unjust. You know, the fact that a woman is vilified and you know, threatened by death. For me, it's a human right that should be guaranteed in Europe. And again, this brings us to Facebook and the role of social media in general, because when a hateful person speaks up on social media, they don't take it out. It's very rare that I signaled so many people, it's very rare that they take out these accounts, or these trolls, they just recreate a new one. And then when the trolls become real threats, meaning that they can find you and actually, you know, be violent towards you, who protects us? So this is also a responsibility from our governments and for society in general. But in terms of having tools and giving tools practical for young people, I would say don't stay silent, because we have the right to speak. It's a human right, and it's the main freedom is the freedom of speech in a democracy, and so one of the main freedoms. So for me, it's the first step in order to bring change. Never stop denouncing injustice.
Thank you. And you are already going in a direction that we really want to stress now, since we are kind of so far into our marathon, and so many that are following us are asking, like this time on Facebook, what can we do as activists around the world practically to protect our democracy? And we asked this question, what democracy means to you, and we saw it can mean different things. And despite that, despite what democracy means to people, what can we do, all of us together, practically, to advance democracy? I'm asking again from the top. So, yes.
Well, I think you have to accept that democracy affects all parts of your life. It is not something that is other. I mean, it basically, demos means people, and that means you and me. It means all of us, everybody. It doesn't belong to politicians. It doesn't belong to political parties. I think that, I mean, I feel in a way that our democracy has been hijacked in the UK. I think it's broken. We have very outdated system here. We have a first past the post system as opposed to proportional representation. I think it's only us and Belarus in the whole of Europe who still operate this outdated voter electoral system. So I think we have to look at other models. We should be trialing other models. So, for example, citizens' assemblies have really worked in other countries. So Ireland, a Catholic country, managed to bring in same-sex marriage and also abortion rights, and did it through a democratic process that was very considered, that was very inclusive, where people were able to discuss the issues for a long time before before they had to enter the voting booth or make a decision. So I would like to see us proposing some very different ways of doing things, and to be starting to trial those. Part of the call of the people who are behind the climate and ecological emergency bill that's just been put before the new session of the Parliament here in the UK, one of the demands is to have a citizens' assembly on climate emergency and on discussing that bill. I once heard about river parliaments, so parliaments of people who live alongside the course of a river. How different that would make decision making if the people who were polluting the river, so the oil company who's got a refinery in the estuary, were listening to the people, in another part of the river who would maybe be talking about fishing or leisure sports, or nature trails. So I think that we could be doing things very, very differently. I was very struck by what happened in Iceland. Sometimes things have to really break before you can remake them in a different way. And so Iceland crowdsourced its constitution. It had a pots and pans revolution. These ways of having revolutions, which doesn't mean armed insurgency, but quiet, but peaceful revolution. I'm really inspired by people who've been able to make extraordinary changes by having grassroots street movements which have been able to make change. And I know we're in a pandemic right now, but that doesn't mean we have to be quiet, we have to stay at home, we have to shut up. I think we've had to find all kinds of really extraordinary ways of still demonstrating that we care about our democracy, that we want the processes in Parliament to be under scrutiny, and really, really importantly, that we do stand in solidarity with all those people whose democracies are under attack.
Definitely, technology seems to be more and more fundamental for democracy to protect from disinformation and from threats of all nature. And I think in Hong Kong, probably the situation is very very extreme in general, but in comparison to the UK and Europe, because their democracy is almost being outlawed. And so you already touched upon practical steps that activists are already taking on the street to peacefully protest against this oppressive government. Is there something else that you would like to see perhaps in the future, Joey? Something that it's not happening yet, but you think should happen or will happen in this direction?
Well,
I mean,
Let's hear first from Joey, and then I'll ask you to Julie. Sorry for the pronunciation.
sorry for the interruption. So I think practically in Hong Kong, the thing that we can do is very restricted because of the national security law. So basically, we can't protest or participate in assemblies anymore. But I still think that there are a lot of things that we can still do as an activist or actually very ordinary citizen of the city. For example, to stand for elections. For example, to establish different kinds of civil organizations. Because in the past, we used to think that participating in elections are the things that people of the political parties do, that are things those politicians do. And most of the people in Hong Kong are not very keen in participating in elections. But then last year, because of the anti-extradition bill movement in Hong Kong, many youths in Hong Kong without experiences of working for a political party or without experiences of related to politics participating in our district council elections, and we got a very impressive landslide victory in that election. And that experience is telling the people of Hong Kong and the youth and the ordinary citizens of the other places that if you are willing to go try and stand for elections and to work for a community and to perfect your community and to stand up for the values that you cherish and you uphold. And also, because of the movement, many youths in Hong Kong, many minority groups in Hong Kong, and many people in Hong Kong are starting to establish different kinds of labor unions. We're establishing different kinds of organizations. For example, we've got some very new labor unions for designers in Hong Kong, for nurses and doctors in Hong Kong, for teachers in Hong Kong, and even for construction workers in Hong Kong. And we've also got some very new organizations that are providing a temporary shelter for protesters who can no longer go back to their homes. We're trying to provide different kinds of assistance, for example, financial assistance. We have got organizations that are looking for jobs for them. So I do encourage people all around the world to establish organizations, because by organizing and establishing a group or a voluntary group or a organization, you are actually gaining the experience to work for a community, to perfect your community, and also at the same time you are helping those minority groups, you are helping those people who are ignored by our government. And we can all do that by by inputting very limited financial efforts, and we can all do that simply by, for example, establishing a page on Facebook or on Instagram. And it is very easy for us all in this era to gather people that are like-minded. And I think that is a very simple and practical thing that all of us, all activists in Hong Kong and all people around the world can do. And I do encourage that.
This is very inspiring, because from the outside, the situation in Hong Kong looks so dire that politically and is equivalent to what's happening in Australia with wildfires, and now what's happening in the US. So thank you for this. I just want to, before giving the floor to Yasmine, you said about having courage, empowerment, political activism, self-educate yourself, go to vote, and don't be afraid, unionize, organize at grassroots level, change your mindset. These are all very powerful key words, I think. And Yasmine, I'm sure that you have a long list of other inspiring words for us. What can you tell us then to practically here in Europe that the activists can do to stand together for democratic values?
You know, throughout my work in Europe, on the past few years, also collaborating with institutions, the main struggle I had was to bridge the top to the bottom, or the bottom to the top. Basically, when I work with the commission or advise commissioners, and I work with them and I see what they do or the potential and what they can do, and then when I speak about this with young people, there is a huge gap. And so the first thing is know your rights. There is so many programs, so many opportunities that we don't, use or take because of lack of knowledge. So spreading knowledge about what we as citizens can do. We have an amazing former MEP in front of us. I encourage everybody to listen to what she did in the past few years and the importance. And I would love to have a conversation one day on Brexit and your UK before Brexit and post Brexit. What we're facing now is a threat on democracy. We are having, governments pushing for nationalism in a negative and dangerous way. And I'm also seeing it in France and Italy. I'm Italian and I live in France. In Italy, we had governments that were promoting openly hate. But now, what can practically young people do and activists do to focus on the reply and on the question? I would love to see young people believing in themselves. Don't hesitate to reach out to activists and get involved on organization. That's how I started when I was 16, on a volunteering in my neighborhood in a city in France where I still see young people dying because of violence in the French banlieue. And so, I started like that. Today I'm advocating also in believing and knowing that this is my goal that I had at 16 years old. It's still the same today. I want to see the violence ending in Europe, and I'm still seeing my friends and my family friends dying. And so for me, it's important to keep knowing that we should find our cause. Should it be environment, gender equality, human rights, democracy, peace, and then take it strong with you and believe in it. Because if you don't do it, then nobody will. If I don't believe that change is possible, then who will? And who will motivate young people to also act? So, as to finish, as Julie said, sorry if I say your name, Mrs. Ward, when you said the generation, your generation failed on us, on our generation, I think part of your generation did. But then, what can we do together? Intergenerational dialogue. What can we teach you and you teach us? I think this is the main focus and perspective that I will give to young people. Don't hesitate to find mentors and get inspired by other activists and senior activists that have much more experience than you.
I knew that I was right. We have other very powerful words. We have break the glass ceiling. That's what I would say, right? Because you can do it. You have, if you get the knowledge and the knowledge is out there, the opportunities are out there, then you can break the glass ceiling. Because that's also important, right? Because you can organize at grassroots level, but then you have to go on top then to help others that are organizing at grassroots level. So it's a sort of a cycle, and also spread the knowledge also for people that have greater power, either because of who they are, their background or their condition. They should join the fight, not let the others fight alone. And so I think that was also very powerful. And I think we have almost reached the end of this, hopefully very inspiring and at the same time kind of practical conversation. So I'm going to leave all of you to have concluding remarks. But I want to start with our Hong Kong, our frontline activist in Hong Kong, who's fighting every day in conditions that are absolutely beyond personally my imagination. And so I want to ask you, Joey, what do you want to tell us as concluding remarks?
Well, so nowadays we can see revolutions happening all around the world, in Hong Kong, in the United States, and in all the other countries around the world. And we know that there's a time for change. It is a time for us to stand together to defend our freedom and democracy from being eroded by tyrannies all around the world. So I would like to say to all of you and to all the activists and all the protesters who are fighting for the values that we believe in, that it's very important for us to stand together to protect our universal values. And by standing together, we are stronger, we are more determined, and power is stronger to fight back to the tyrannies. So I think I would like to, and I would also like to say thank you to all the people who have been supporting Hong Kong, who have been paying attention to the situation of Hong Kong right now. And it is very important for us to know that you are standing with us in a fight against tyrannies from China that is trying to invade, that is trying to erode the core values of Hong Kong. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And a follow-up question from Colombe, because she really, and I agree with her in asking this question. So what can we do for you? Fight this struggle with you in Hong Kong?
I think it is very important for us to know that we have our friends around the world outside who have been organizing protest rallies and assemblies that is trying to bring out the message from Hong Kong to people around the world. Because of the national security law, we people in Hong Kong can no longer do that. We are very, very restricted by the law that we can, even simply by talking to foreign politicians or even simply by attending this forum, could cause me colliding with foreign powers under the national security law. So it is very important for us to know that we have friends around the world that is standing with us and are willing to bring out the message from Hong Kong to people around the world.
Thank you very much. I want to leave a last word with Julie and Yasmine. So please, the floor is yours. Julie.
I think that everybody needs to ask lots of questions. Don't take things at face value. Query everything, question everything. Simple.
Thank you.
Soundbites.
Simple but powerful.
Simple. Yeah, but simple sound bites don't necessarily give a full account of the complexity of the lives that we lead. And I think one of the things about populism and populists is that they just have simple answers. And I never yet saw a populist politician who could propose anything. They were against everything and for nothing. So we have to question things, and then we have to have ideas to put forward. We have to have solutions. I also began to really worry about people who talked about the rule of law, because so often in the European Parliament we were talking about, we stand up for truth, democracy, freedom, respect, rule of law. And then I would think, well, what if that law is really bad? What if that law prevents you from being an opposition voice? What if that law means that you can go to prison because you stand in solidarity with somebody? So I say this now because when I heard about what was happening in Hong Kong, I thought, oh, well, I will go, because I made a point during my 5.5-year mandate of being wherever I needed to be to speak up for the people who didn't have a voice, because I knew that my presence and my words could stop somebody from being executed, could stop somebody from being tortured. And so I was willing to go to Hong Kong. And then somebody said, but you too could be imprisoned if you went to Hong Kong. So even foreign nationals like me now would be under threat for speaking up if I chose to go to Hong Kong. So I think we even have to interrogate whether or not the laws that we have are laws that are fit for purpose. All right. And that might mean that even though I'm a poet and I'm a theatre maker, I'm going to try and dig down deep to look at those laws. And I'm going to discuss with people whether or not these laws are good. And I think we're going to have to present, which is why things like the climate and ecological emergency bill that is coming in is so important. And it is why what Boris Johnson is trying to do by bringing in the internal market bill is so dangerous. Okay, it's really dangerous. So please, everybody, you don't sometimes getting hold of a document and looking at a legal document may be a bit off-putting, but as a teenager, I failed everything. I only came to education in later life. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. Take hold of stuff, grab it, read it, critique it.
Thank you for this.
Ask the questions.
I'm going to try soundbite myself as well. I think from your words, I would say put ethics first. So when it comes to democracy, because that really, it's the only way to make a difference. Yasmine.
Thank you. I mean, what you said is so crucial, it's so important. We need to have a critical mindset and questioning everything. It doesn't mean because today the law states that, we have countries in Europe where LGBT people are not even recognized, or where minorities are targeted. For example, I can just mention the law in Italy that prevented solidarity or humanitarians to support and to help migrants. They will be jailed, European citizens, just to show support. That is part of our values as Europeans. But for me, when it comes to having a critical mindset, we need also to make sure, and that's what I try to do, that we have first call them in and then you call them out. First, try to change things from within, because if you live in a society where this is possible, of course, in Europe, I think there is still opportunities. If your national country, if your national government doesn't hear you, you have another body, which is the European Union, the European Court. So take this right and try to change it from that step. If this doesn't work, then maybe you have to take the streets and then protest. But there is many levels that we can, operate as activists. And then, of course, I would like to end with one word, which is all my support to the Hong Kong people. And as you say, Joy, you want to know you have friends. Well, know that you have many friends, and we're all behind you, supporting and tweeting and trying to denounce as much as we can these huge injustices that you are facing. So all my support to you.
This is so inspiring, and we are not going to let your voice, Joy, be, not heard. So we are also here for that. But thank you, all of you, all the speakers, and all the participants for being here. I mean, this is a very true marathon. We started at 8 a.m. So UK time. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon.
Okay.